Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Kyle Rose, CEO of Rook Quality Systems. We're going to let a few more people join, and then we'll get started with the webinar today. Today's topic is 3 FDA regulatory updates, what to know, and how to comply. So we'll be covering 3 distinct topics, talking about what you need to do, how it might affect your company, and what the timelines are, as well as what you need to do to comply with these 3 regulatory updates. I think these cover, like I said, a wide range of topics, but it'll be useful for a lot of different types of devices. So very excited to talk about these today and pass along some information about what we're helping our clients with to make sure they're compliant with these new updates. Quick background on me. So I'm Kyle Rose. I'm CEO and founder of Rook Quality Systems. I am a quality and regulatory consultant that helps advise medical device companies around the world. I've been working in this role for over 12 years now. My work has helped and traveled to different types of organizations. So I work with a lot of startups, work with a lot of early stage companies. We also work closely with the NIH and a lot of different programs. Recently, we supported the RADx program with over 100 COVID diagnostic companies, helping them go from very early stage academic companies into manufacturing devices as quickly as possible during the COVID pandemic. I'm also an advisor to multiple Fortune 500 companies on all aspects of quality and regulatory for their medical devices, software, and diagnostics. This includes established companies, but also new companies that are looking to get into the medical device field or diagnostic field. I'm a dedicated mentor to multiple incubators, hospital systems, accelerators, and universities. So really pride in helping early stage companies, early stage founders with passing along knowledge, information, tips, and tricks that we've developed to help them get their device to market and support their progress in getting new medical technology to market as quickly as possible and as compliant as possible. Just from high level things on the webinar, we are recording this, so we will share the slides and the presentation with everybody that's signed up. So if you're not able to stay on for the whole time, we will share that information with everybody as well. Thank you again for signing up and following along with Rook and all of our marketing efforts. A little background on Rook Quality Systems. So like I said, the company is now 12 years old. We support all types of medical device companies, as well as all different sizes of companies as well. Everything from 1 to 2 person startups all the way up to Fortune 500 medical device companies. We offer comprehensive quality and regulatory services, helping with FDA compliance, ISO certification, global market entry, and international compliance as well. And then making sure that once you have access to these markets, you're able to maintain compliance and continue to sell your device and have compliance with your regulations, your internal procedures, things like that. Some of the key areas we support our clients are quality system design, so helping to actually create and implement that first quality system, supporting design control and risk management, both for your first device you're trying to get through FDA, but also if you're developing or remediating any previous device files, technical files, we support that work as well. We support a lot of software documentation, so both software requirement definition, risk management, but also ongoing testing and cybersecurity. On the post-market side, we support CAPAs, complaints, NCRs, all of these quality items. We do a lot of audit support as well, so both conducting internal and supplier audits, as well as supporting companies when they're going through external audits. So if the FDA calls and says, hey, we're going to be there in a week, and you need some support to prep for that audit, but also talk with the FDA while they're there, Rook can jump in and help you with that FDA or ISO audit to make sure you're confident and you have the people in the room that can support that audit process. We also do a lot of quality system training. So similar to the webinar today, we have certain topics that our clients request, and we'll provide training presentations for their whole team that they can then use going forward to train their team for new employees and things like that. Regulatory submissions. So I talked about FDA submissions. We also do international regulatory submissions for big and small markets. So if you're looking to expand the scope of your device, we help a lot with international regulatory support as well. High level, we have a global team. So we have over 35 consultants. We have the majority in the US. We also have a branch in Taiwan and a branch in Europe. We have 13 certified auditors, which include former FDA and ISO auditors for big notified bodies. A list of a few of our clients here that support Rook, and we continue to support with them, range of software, diagnostics, monitoring devices, sterile devices. So we do a little bit of everything and have had good success with all of these types of devices. For today, so we're going to be covering these three topics. So first is the new FDA Draft Guidance on chemical analysis of biocompatibility. So what to know and how to prepare for compliance. This guidance, I think, is really beneficial. We've worked with a few companies over the past few years that needed to do chemical analysis for their either implant or cleaning device, and there wasn't a specific rule or guidance from the FDA. So this is very helpful and goes into a lot of detail on how to do this chemical analysis. Also going to touch on these new recognized sterilization standards from the FDA. So touch on each of those and how they might apply to your type of device. And then lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about the LDT Final Rule that got implemented and passed earlier this year, and what the stage 1 requirements are for companies that are LDTs that have to comply with this in May of 2025. So these are the three topics, cover a lot of different types of devices. So looking forward to talking to each one here in just a minute. We do have a quick poll that we're going to start with first. So if you guys could to fill out the poll, it should be popping up now. I just got mine. So some questions on what you would like to learn about. Do you have a regulatory submission? Things like that. Give you a minute or two to go ahead and complete the poll. All right. Hopefully everybody was able to complete the poll, and we will continue with the presentation. So first topic is the new draft guidance that was released in September for chemical analysis of medical devices. So this is the first draft guidance that was just released in September. It provides a good amount of detail for manufacturers with critical recommendations on how to collect and report chemical characterization data. It's aimed at enhancing the chemical analysis process that is within the scope of the biocompatibility assessment. And it focuses on standardization, accuracy, and risk-based approaches. So for those of you that might be new or not completely understand what this is, you have your typical biocompatibility assessment for your device. This is typically for devices that contact the body or implanted devices. There's also the chemical analysis, which is if there's chemicals leaching off of your device or that are part of the material that might come off during heating or any other use of the device. The FDA wants to identify these chemicals and also analyze any hazards from these chemicals, any biocompatibility risks, things like that. So that's the main focus of this chemical analysis for biocompatibility. There have been gaps in both the testing as well as testing between labs, and this is related to different deficiencies in pre-market filing. So this guidance is intended to align the testing process, align what's required for different types of devices, and ensure that there is kind of consensus going forward that everybody that is submitting chemical analysis related to biocompatibility is doing it in a similar fashion and doing similar types of testing. Manufacturers and stakeholders have until November 18th to submit comments and questions on this guidance. So if you are working on a device now and will have to do chemical analysis, and you have specific questions now through the next week and a half, is the time to submit these questions to the FDA, submit comments that can then be added to the final guidance. It feels like this one is moving pretty quick, so it'll likely get published early 2025. Some of the guidances move faster than others, and it feels like this one is one the FDA is focusing on and pushing through pretty quickly. On the importance of biocompatibility and chemical analysis, biocompatibility, like I said, ensures materials used in medical devices are safe for contact with the body. This is really critical for devices with prolonged contact or implant or invasive use devices. The role of chemical analysis identifies and quantifies the substances that may leach or extract from the materials, helping to prevent risks like toxicity and irritation, allergic reaction, sensitivity, all of these things that are within the scope of biocompatibility as well. The draft guidance provides a framework for this chemical analysis, so it's promoting consistent, reliable results across different labs, as well as addressing variability in the pre-market submissions. So this will really help to make sure that there's safe device usage and no harmful chemicals being introduced to the body that weren't previously tested or identified during the development and testing process. The key aspects of this guidance, so how the FDA plans to standardize extractable and leachable testing, improving the analytical methods and data reporting, addressing laboratory variability, so how this is being done differently in different labs, a risk-based approach to chemical testing, as well as harmonization with specific 10993 standards, which are the biocompatibility standards. So for standardizing extractables and leachables, so this emphasis is really on different protocols that the FDA has recommended to detect chemicals that might migrate from the device materials. I forgot to mention when we first jumped on, there is some Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions, go ahead and put those in the question section or the chat. So we might answer some as we go, but if you do have questions, we'll have a time at the end for some questions as well. The FDA guidance also recommends testing based on design type, exposure, and contact level with the body. So this kind of aligns with the risk-based approach, different testing for different types of devices based on the risk and contact time. Why this is critical, why it matters for companies is it's essential for assessing long-term exposure risks and ensuring devices do not release harmful substances, and ensures that devices remain safe throughout their usage. And this is really critical for permanent implant devices, making sure that over the life cycle of the device, it's not going to degrade and start to leach chemicals that will cause more damage than the implant is benefits. So with the standardization of this extractable and leachable testing, the FDA has a few different recommendations. So first is selecting appropriate solvents and conditions. So using solvents and extraction conditions that reflect realistic usage of the device, considering worst case scenarios. Within the guidance, they provide different types of solvents you can use, polar, non-polar, different types of alcohol or mixtures you can use as well. So you really need to look at your device, look at how it's being used, and then determine the best path for your testing relative to the solvents. Simulate clinical exposure, so designing testing protocols that mimic the clinical environment, temperature, duration, pH, things like that, of where it will be used in the body. Conducting different types of extractions, so performing extractions over different time frames for both immediate and prolonged profiles. And then also validation of these methods. So ensuring that your testing methods are validated to meet standards for accuracy, sensitivity, and reproducibility, and then having detailed reporting for this. So just like everything else with your device testing or your biocompatibility testing, the majority of this chemical analysis is going to be done by an external lab. You'll have to work with them to identify what tests apply to your device, what the conditions are of the testing, and then make sure that they have the correct protocols in place, the equipment and methods are validated, and then also that you get this report that you can then share with the FDA with your your FDA submission. With the kind of next scope in the guidance is improving the analytical methods and data reporting. So focusing on quality and consistency with the analytical methods. With this testing, it is pretty technical, analytical chemistry-based testing. So you need to have advanced techniques like your GCMS, your gas chromatography mass spec, or liquid chromatography mass spec for detecting these chemicals that are potentially leaching off the device, ensuring you have emphasis on sensitivity of these methods to make sure that your limit of detection for this is sensitive enough to detect even trace amounts of the substances, and then having best practices for data reporting of this. So diving into what are the most applicable methods for detecting and testing these chemicals, and then how you're reporting it. This also goes into the validation of these GC/LC methods to make sure they're validated in the labs first, and they can analyze the chemicals that you're looking for your device. Again, this structured data helps support regulatory reviews and ensures clarity when you're going through the FDA submission and review process. So for the recommendations specifically on these analytical methods and data reporting, using the methods that apply most for your device, so GC versus LC, specifically for what type of chemicals you're looking for, using targeted analysis for known toxicants. So looking at the materials that you're using and knowing what potential substances might pose biocompatibility risks, and then searching for these with targeted analysis for your toxicants, setting detection limits for these chemicals to ensure that they meet the limits or thresholds if these are already defined. This should also align with your methods of testing to make sure that they meet these detection limits. Using comprehensive data presentation, so output of all the results you get from your GC/LC testing, and then data complete list, providing all the full chemical profiles, including both identified and unidentified compounds, to provide a holistic view of the chemical exposure. So really diving into the depths of the analytical chemistry to make sure that you're analyzing everything. You have targeted analysis for things you know are a risk, and then providing the full chemical profile for your product. So this really is a pretty thorough testing and provides a very detailed description of what type of testing you need to do and how you need to do it. So if this does apply to your device or your testing, make sure that you have planned for this and a lot of specific time and money to get this testing done. Another thing that the guidance document discusses is laboratory variability. So making sure that we have consistency across different laboratories. So this is not only for the device manufacturers, the ones that will be going through the testing, but also the guidance applies to the labs that will be doing the testing. So make sure that they have detailed protocols to streamline data collection and reporting, and that they have validated methods for conducting this type of analytical testing. Goal from the FDA is to accelerate the regulatory approval process for these devices and to minimize any deficiencies with the submission review and really accelerate regulatory approval. So this guidance applies both to actual manufacturers, but as well as the testing labs that might be doing this testing. As I said earlier, it's unlikely you'll be doing this testing in-house. Even if you have a full analytical chemistry lab, I still think most of this will be done externally. Addressing laboratory variability, so these specific recommendations that the FDA has proposed, using standardized extraction methods and equipment to minimize variability, encouraging labs to conduct comparative testing with reference materials to align results across different labs, using consistent sample preparation techniques, so standardizing steps for sample collection, preparation, and analysis to reduce inconsistencies in chemical profiles, Documenting detailed methodologies, so requiring labs to report specifics of their protocols, allowing the FDA to assess these. So that might be something that's requested in your submission, that you actually submit the protocol and the report for this chemical analysis. And then hoping that there is collaboration between these labs and these key stakeholders to make sure that they are sharing the best practices with the other labs as well, to really kind of move up the whole industry to make sure everybody's doing the similar type of testing and reporting with these chemical analysis. It also talked a little bit, I don't think it's on here, about reference standards. So making sure that you are, when you're doing your testing, you're using a known reference standard, and the reference standard is of a high quality, to make sure that it is a high quality reference standard, which is something that's pretty standard for analytical chemistry testing, but also called out in this guidance document. The FDA also encourages a risk-based approach to this chemical testing. So make sure that the amount of testing is tailored to the device's risk level. So within that scope, we have how long the device is in contact with the body and where specifically it's in contact, as well as the risk of the materials that are being used, right? If it's a known material that's been used in implants with no history of any issues, then it's going to have probably a lower need for this chemical analysis. If it's a new material that you've developed yourself, there's probably going to be additional testing required for this new type of material. So really helping and aligning with a risk-based approach, with the FDA is pushing out for a lot of both quality and regulatory focus, but this is aligned on the testing side as well. So helps manufacturers optimize resources using a risk-based approach. This should align with your risk analysis, your hazard analysis, to say, do we have these risks for this material? What are the risks of chemical issues, of biocompatibility issues? And then that risk level should then align with how much testing you're doing for your product. So identifying this is going into more detail. This also aligns with the biocompatibility standard, but classifying devices based on contact, skin versus bloodstream, things like that. Prioritizing higher risk devices for more intense testing, and also reducing testing for lower risk devices. Documenting risk assessments within the scope of your QMS, but also potentially within the scope of your submission, to show this risk-based approach. This also can apply for IDE submission. So if you're doing an investigational device exemption for a clinical trial, you might have to include some of this risk assessment as well. And then implementing flexible testing protocols to align with the risks and use cases to avoid unnecessary testing with your product. This new guidance is also designed to align with ISO 10993-18, which is the chemical characterization of medical device materials within a risk management process. So aligned to not only meet the requirements for the FDA, but also meet the requirements for ISO and other international markets as well. So helps manufacturers meet the requirements for both FDA and 1993-18 with one set of testing. FDA recommendations for aligning with this 10993-18. So, using both the standard and the guidance when you're going through this process, implementing the ISO protocols that apply for your device, creating a chemical analysis plan that outlines the risk of the device and the testing needed, maintaining compliance with global markets. So again, if standards get updated, right, making sure that you're aligning or doing a gap analysis to the new standards to make sure you're still in compliance, and then consistent reporting framework as well. So making sure that both the ISO and the FDA guidance align on how these things should be reported within your design file and your technical files. All right, so that's the overview on the chemical analysis. We're now going to kind of change lanes. There might be some overlap in this section. So this is covering more on sterilization. So we'll cover, there will definitely be some overlap. If you have an implantable device, it's most likely it's going to be sterile as well, right? So will be some overlap between the two as well. So within the scope of these new sterilization standards, the FDA has announced recognition of 3 additional standards recently that apply with it, or that are applicable for sterilization processes. So ISO 11737, sterilization of healthcare products within the scope of bacterial endotoxin testing. There's 1140, which is chemical indicators and then general requirements for those. So the biological or chemical indicators that are used to show that the sterilization cycle was complete. And then also sterilization dose, so ISO 13004, sterilization of healthcare products, specifically on the radiation sterilization methods and how to select the best sterilization dose for your validation. So these are the 3 new standards the FDA has recognized. We'll talk about each one in detail and how you need to update your records to comply with these new consensus standards. First is the 11737. So this is the bacterial endotoxin testing. So this is for assessing endotoxin levels in medical devices that are in a sterile environment that then contact blood or tissues. It outlines methods for detection and quantification of these endotoxins, such as the LAL test, and recommends specific testing approaches to ensure consistent results. This covers actual test methods, as well as limits for endotoxin levels for different types of devices, based on where they're contacting and a similar how long they're being used. Implications for medical device manufacturers and companies. The bacterial endotoxin testing has been around for a while, but this is more aligning with the updated standard that came out in 2023. This testing helps prevent endotoxin-induced fevers or inflammatory responses when devices that potentially have endotoxins are used. This standard reinforces the importance of this testing and minimizing endotoxin contamination in devices. It aligns with the FDA's global requirement, so making sure this aligns with other markets as well, and making sure we can streamline compliance around this. Steps to comply with 11737. So developing an in-house or contract endotoxin testing method. Ensure that you have a validated method such as the LAL assay for detecting endotoxins. Establishing clear limit values for this based on your device and patient exposure risk, and maintaining these records through your testing. One key thing that we've worked with on our clients, and slightly different than biocompatibility, is this endotoxin testing is related to actually manufacturing. So you do have initial endotoxin testing that's related to kind of design verification, but you need to be doing ongoing endotoxin testing for manufacturing, whether that's for every batch or if it's more of a set time frame to do endotoxin testing based on your validated process. You have to do ongoing endotoxin testing to ensure that you're meeting the requirements of this standard and there's no endotoxins being allowed in your product that weren't destroyed during sterilization. So you make sure you're confirming that with these ongoing test results. Also, staff training is part of the scope, so making sure you're training your team on endotoxin risks, testing requirements, and the data recording to ensure consistent compliance. The next standard is the 1140 for chemical indicators and sterilization. So this is part of the series that's dedicated to sterilization indicators and different requirements for these as well. So this is more on if you're using these types of chemical indicators with your sterilization process, how to evaluate that you have ones that meet their standard and meet the requirements. Within this, they list 6 different types of chemical indicators, and you need to align with each type that aligns with your process and the indicator you're trying to determine for this use. So it touches on a few different things, such as color change indicators, how they should work, things like that, sensitivity levels on these actual chemical indicators for sterilization. This is an older standard, so 2014, but this is the first time the FDA has recognized this standard for making sure that your chemical indicators align with this ISO standard. So making sure that you've referenced this standard if you are using chemical indicators as part of your standard list, and it's also part of your review. But you also want to make sure that the chemical indicators that you're using as part of your process align and meet the requirements of the standard as well. If you're outsourcing your sterilization, this is something that your sterilization vendor should also be complying with. So make sure that you review that during your audit of your sterilization vendor. Some of the key requirements and benefits that are outlined in the standard. So defining the performance criteria. So requirements for how these chemical indicators should perform under specific sterilization conditions, ensuring there's color change accuracy. So making sure there's a clear display with the chemical indicator, both before it's been sterilized and after sterilization, or ensuring that you met your sterilization assurance level. Making sure you have product labeling on these chemical indicators that shows what information must be included, such as the sterilization method compatibility, intended use, things like that. So making sure that the chemical indicators themselves meet the labeling requirements of 11140. Benefits of compliance, so consistency in sterilization quality, so making sure that there's a high standard for sterilization effectiveness and how this is tracked when using chemical indicators. Enhanced regulatory compliance, so aligning this standard again with global market access and global market standards. Compliance steps for the actual manufacturer. So if you are using chemical indicators, you need to make sure you use the one that's aligned with your sterilization method and parameters. So, different sterilization methods, ETO versus steam, things like that. Make sure you're using the correct chemical indicator. Verifying that they meet the performance criteria for the ISO 11140 for accuracy and reliability. That also ties back to actual batch controls and things like that as well. So making sure that when you receive, if you're doing this sterilization in-house, you receive the certificates of compliance, assurance, whatever, with these new chemical indicators that you're doing. If you're reviewing your sterilization for your vendors, also make sure that they are keeping this information for their chemical indicators. Conducting validation testing to make sure they perform as expected under the actual sterilization conditions, and then following guidelines for documentation and validation on the chemical indicators. In some situations, you might have to include this in regulatory submissions, or it's more likely it'll be covered during an audit as well and review of sterilization. Typically for companies that are ISO certified, there's a specific sterilization audit where they're just focusing on sterilization by a subject matter expert in sterilization. So this information, and it's typically every 2 or 3 years, so this information will be covered directly in that special audit covering sterilization. So making sure that you have this information, if you're doing it internally, if you're outsourcing sterilization, that you have this information from your sterilization vendor, and they're tracing this back to the manufacturers of these chemical indicators. The last sterilization standard that is newly acknowledged by the FDA is this ISO 13004. This is for radiation sterilization. So identifying, this is a whole series on radiation sterilization for healthcare products. It introduces a specific method for identifying the verification dose of the specific sterilization dose, so the VD max and SD, based on the microbial load of the product. intended to help manufacturers select the appropriate sterilization dose, ensuring that you have a efficient sterilization process when you are going through the validation of your sterilization. So once you're using this radiation method to validate sterilization of your product, you need to identify this VD max SD and then verify that going forward with future sterilization cycles. The purpose of this is to optimize radiation dosing. So you're tailoring this dose to the bioburden of the product, preventing overexposure or under-sterilization for this device. It supports product safety by effectively inactivating contaminants while making sure the devices aren't damaged with more radiation than's needed, right? So that's the main focus of identifying and validating this process. Key components of the standard. So making sure you have a sterilization dose that's aligned with your product, your microbial load, and adjusting for the contamination risk, reducing the need for overly high doses, which could affect the material or packaging, using dose substantiation to determine the minimum radiation needed to achieve sterility, and then aligning with the calculations and formulas provided in the standard to identify this VD max SD to meet your sterility assurance level or SAL. It also provides additional documentation requirements to make sure that you are keeping up with the records for this testing, making sure you have the correct dose, rationale, and this has been validated. You also need to verify with each sterilization batch that you're meeting the requirements of your dosing, right? So this happens a lot with companies that are outsourcing sterilization or using a contract manufacturer that's also doing sterilization. You still need to review the batch records of sterilization and have those in your quality system. So for the actual ongoing compliance within the quality system, you need to make sure you have these records and you're verifying that each dose met your SAL and your VD max calculations that you set up with the sterilization validation. Compliance steps for manufacturers, so performing the bioburden testing to assess microbial load before dose selection, following the ISO standard for protocols and data collection to support this dose calculation and validation process, using the VD max SD selection guidelines to identify the correct dose, and then documenting the results for your validation and ongoing sterilization efforts going forward. And then again, make sure you align with the current version of 13004. Records should be maintained in your quality system. If you're doing a regulatory submission, your validation process is likely going to be submitted with your regulatory submission, and then the ongoing records of sterilization and the dose meeting your requirements will need to be reviewed and approved and maintain your quality system for future audits and compliance. All right, so last topic we have, so we covered sterilization, we covered the chemical analysis. Now we're going to touch on a slightly different topic. So this is the LDT rule. So this really just applies to diagnostic companies that are currently lab developed tests that are going to have to meet the requirements of broader diagnostics within the scope of the FDA in early 2025. So earlier this year, the FDA finalized their ruling on the upregulation of laboratory developed tests. These are typically diagnostic tests that are maintained at a specific lab, and samples are sent to a specific lab to do testing, whether that's within a hospital system or sent from other places to do testing at one specific lab. So in the past, these LDTs haven't gone through a regulatory approval or review. FDA thinks there's a risk with this. So now they are bringing these LDTs within the broader scope of medical device diagnostics. and ensuring that they meet the regulatory standards as other diagnostic devices for quality, accuracy, reliability, and safety. This rule is being rolled out in multiple stages, so there's different requirements, different timelines for different types of LDTs. We are going to put out a lot more content on the LDT requirements, how to implement these things, how to maintain compliance, how to get your submissions in place, starting early next year. This is kind of just an initial touch on what's required for this first compliance deadline in May 6, 2025. I was at the ADLM conference earlier this year, and there's a lot of companies there that are in laboratory medicine or have their own LDTs that were very concerned with this new regulation and new rule, as well as the compliance deadlines coming up in 2025. Being a person that's worked in quality systems and diagnostics on the high level regulatory scope, I think these initial compliance deadlines are not overly burdensome. So I think it is something that most labs should be able to implement pretty easily. I also think these are things that most labs should already have in place as far as basic requirements for complaint handling and MDR reporting. So these things will be going into effect, and companies should start planning to implement these things, as soon as today, right? So if you haven't started planning to implement these initial LDT rules, you should start to work on these things. For this May 25th deadline, companies that meet the initial rollout will have to have compliance with the following requirements. So first one is medical device reporting. So this is 21 CFR Part 806. This is related to adverse events and reporting of adverse events to the FDA. So if there's a severe injury or death or something that happened that could lead to a severe injury or death, then the company needs to notify the FDA aligned with the MDR format of what happened with this. In the scope of diagnostics, this is really around, failures of performance or accuracy for the specific diagnostic and how you'd have to report that to the FDA. With lab developed tests, these are mostly being done at a specific lab. So I think the MDRs will be a limited scope, but it really depends on what type of LDT and what the risk is of that test being wrong. Reporting of corrections and removals is the other part that's also required. This is also covered in 806. And then quality system requirements for complaint handling, I think is the bigger scope of what companies will have to comply and what they'll be doing day to day. We'll go into this section in more detail. So who is required to comply? So this table lists the different types of IVDs and when they'll need to comply. So this is more specific to specific LDTs, and I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail, but I feel like most LDT labs will know where their test falls in this, and then when they need to start compliance. This again is based on a risk-based approach. So higher risk devices need to start compliance at this May 2025 deadline. Within the scope of who needs to comply, they have outlined three main groups. So device manufacturers, importers, and the medical device user facility. Most of this will really just apply to the LDT manufacturers, and since LDT is lab developed tests, this will be the specific labs that are developing and running these tests that must comply with these standards. Specifically for MDR reporting, there's a reporting timeline, and there's also specific forms that you need to fill out when using this. So the form 3500A is an online form, the FDA website that you have to complete and submit electronically. There's also a 5-day report that you might have to submit. We are pushing out a MDR reporting ebook in early December, so we'll have additional information and content LDT companies can use to know how to submit this 5-day report, this FDA form 3500A, for any MDRs once this deadline kicks in. We also submit MDRs for a lot of our clients. You can also work with Rook to have us be the person involved with submitting these reports directly to the FDA. So we support a lot of our clients in actually submitting MDR reports for them when needed. The complaint handling requirements are outlined in this 21 CFR 0.198. So outlines providing records or standards for receiving, reviewing, evaluating, and investigating any device complaints. The FDA defines a complaint as any written, electronic, or oral communication alleging deficiencies in a device's or diagnostics identity, quality, durability, reliability, safety, effectiveness, or performance. So complaints are a critical part of medical device quality systems and ongoing compliance. It's really essential that you process any feedback you get regarding your LDT device and then determine whether or not that is a complaint. Not all feedback that you get from people using your device or interpreting the results is necessarily going to be a complaint, but you need to have a process in place with procedures that outline what you define as a complaint and not a complaint, and then what steps need to be done once you've identified it as a complaint. One of the key aspects within the scope of FDA and complaint handling is the investigation of the complaint to identify what the issue is and what you need to do. So whether that was a training issue or a handling issue or a performance issue, you need to define that as part of your investigation and then determine if you need to make changes, update your procedure, update your processes, whatever it might be. So within the scope of these requirements for the LDT, you need to have a complaint procedure and a complaint log where you track and investigate these complaints. There's a lot of different tools to do this. We've published recently, and it's going to be on a future slide, a complaint checklist and a complaint form that companies can download for free from our website. There's also EQMS tools that have complaint handling modules. So Greenlight Guru, QuickFault, all these tools have complaint handling modules that align with the FDA requirements in 820.198. The last one is corrections and removals. So this also is part of the May 2025 requirement for these specific LDTs. So manufacturers must report any correction or removal related to your product to reduce a health risk or remedy a violation that might present a health risk. The removal part, not as likely because you're not typically going to have LDTs in the market at different locations. So it's really more on the correction side as far as I'm interpreting this. There are reporting timelines to the FDA. There's also, we recommend having specific forms that you can use to complete this corrections or removals if this applies for your product. Documentation is still required. You should still have SOPs internally that cover correction removals that align with the FDA requirements. So making sure that your internal procedures align with 21 CFR Part 806, and that you've trained your team on what to do if this happens for your LDT product. As I mentioned earlier, this is the complaint template bundle we put together. We've partnered with Greenlight Guru on this bundle, so you can visit rookqs.com, click on the templates and tools, and then select template bundle, and you can get this for free. I think you submit an email. This is aligned with what is required for LDT companies, specifically with complaint handling and complaint reporting. So I think it's a great tool for companies just starting out and starting to get into this compliance mode and identify what they need to do to comply with these new LDT rules. So that is everything we have for today. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by FDA requirements, look to Rook. We have a team of 35 plus consultants that support all types of devices, but definitely implant devices, sterile devices, and LDTs, offering clear guidance to help you meet regulatory requirements. We work with a lot of innovative devices as well. So if you're not sure where your device fits in the regulatory landscape, we can help do regulatory assessments and get your device to market as quickly as possible. We do have a few minutes left, so we will jump into some questions. Just reiterating, everything will be recorded, and we will share this with everybody that signed up as well. If we can't answer your question today, we will try to log back and answer your question offline as well. I did mention coming into this that I'm not necessarily an expert on all of these topics. I think the chemical analysis I touched a little bit earlier in my career in analytical chemistry. Some of the sterilization stuff, we have other people on our team who are experts in those as well. So initial question from anonymous attendee. Do the requirements for chemical analysis also apply to the primary packaging of a device? Yes. So there should also be chemical analysis for the packaging of your device. This should be aligned with a risk-based approach. If you're using a device packaging material that's been widespread used, the amount of testing might be lower. Another area that was called out in the guidance document, and I think something that we've seen issues with in the past as well, is things like mold release agents or anything that might be used during the cleaning or preparation of a product. The guidance clearly says that you need to test kind of post all those things being done, right? So if you have a process where you mold a product and then have a mold release agent that's on the mold, and then you have some cleaning afterwards or some solvent wash or whatever it might be, that full process of what you would typically do in manufacturing needs to accompany the device before it goes into this chemical analysis testing. Likely the same for biocompatibility. We have seen situations where companies are, for biocompatibility, just testing part of the material. You can't test the full device in some cases, but they didn't have the mold release on there, right? So you're going to make sure that you're using the final process and testing that would align with how your device is going to be manufactured when you're doing this chemical analysis testing. It's another question from Sarah Vujovic. Is the FDA biocompatibility assessment guidance to be used as a direction for required testing, but not a replacement for the 10993 testing? So this is very similar to, FDA has a guidance for biocompatibility testing for high-level 10993, not just chemical analysis. So these are designed to work together. So with FDA guidance, so it's typically things that they want you to look at and focus on specifically that might be in addition to the 10993 standards, and that's why they've created the guidance. So some of the things around how reporting should be done, how it should be presented in regulatory submissions to the FDA, how they want labs to kind of work together and have similar reporting procedures using similar references, things like that, I think are also the scope of the guidance that are outside of specifically the 10993 standard. So when you are going through the process of identifying what chemical analysis testing you need to do, you should be referencing both the standard itself for compliance to the standard, but also the guidance to make sure any other additional things that are called out in the guidance are met with your device. I've also seen similar questions of, this is a draft guidance, do we need to comply with it now? Even though it's not finalized, you should still use the draft guidance and align your testing with draft guidance if you are in the process of developing a device now or getting ready to do testing, biocompatibility, or chemical analysis. The draft guidance is draft, but it is published. So they went through that step of publishing it on their, but not, it's still draft. But you should still use that information with your testing and identification of your testing. All right. We have some questions from Paxton on LDTs. For the scope of LDTs, are the manufacturer activities, enroll, spec developer, etc., only limited to the laboratory, or will another entity be required to take on the compliance requirements as well? So, I think it really depends on how your LDT is being used. I think there are situations where companies are buying tests and using them differently at different labs or adding additional things on at their own lab. And that is making them their own specific LDT. So specific to that lab, they would need these requirements as well. I think these requirements apply to both the manufacturer as well as the actual lab that is doing the testing and doing the reporting. I think that was a big part of the reason why this LDT rule was implemented, is that there was a lot of these labs doing kind of independent tests or creating their own diagnostic stuff from some established test, and they want to make sure that that meets the FDA requirements. And I think that's all the questions we have for today. So thanks again, everyone. We have our contact information here. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, any follow-up, or if you want to schedule a meeting with me or anybody else on the Rook team to get some support on your quality and regulatory-free device. Thanks again.